Welcome to Humanity's Memory, God in the Debates, the political and economic exploitation of Jesus in America. Introduction. In the United States, religion and politics have long shared an uneasy relationship. While the Constitution explicitly guarantees the separation of church and state, political actors across the centuries have persistently blurred the line when it suited their agendas. At the heart of this intersection lies Christianity, and more specifically the symbolic invocation of Jesus Christ. In modern American politics, debates, both the literal televised electoral debates and the broader ideological confrontations, are infused with religious rhetoric. The language of faith, particularly references to Jesus, has been appropriated not merely to express personal belief, but to cultivate loyalty, inspire votes, and justify economic ventures. This essay explores the political and economic exploitation of Jesus in American debates, tracing its historical roots, cultural significance, contemporary manifestations, and the dangers it poses for democratic governance. The historical context of faith in politics religion has shaped America from its inception. The Puritan settlers viewed the New World as a promised land, and themselves as God's chosen people. The rhetoric of divine mission was woven into the nation's founding mythology, culminating in phrases such as "a city upon a hill" and "in God we trust." By the time the Founding Fathers drafted the Constitution, they intentionally sought to restrain state religion, wary of the destructive European wars fueled by faith. Yet they could not erase religion from public life, and over time, the language of Christianity became central to national identity. Throughout the 19th century, Jesus was invoked in the struggles over abolition, temperance, and women's suffrage. Politicians on both sides claimed divine backing, underscoring how malleable religious symbolism could be in debates. By the 20th century, the Cold War further entrenched Christianity in politics. Against the backdrop of atheistic communism, American leaders declared the United States a Christian nation under God. Eisenhower's addition of "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954 cemented this narrative. The historical trajectory reveals that invoking Jesus or God was never purely about spirituality. It was always entangled with cultural power and political gain. In today's debates, this tradition manifests with renewed intensity. God in modern electoral debates, televised debates are now a staple of American politics. They serve not only as platforms for policy articulation, but also as stages for performance, emotion, and symbolic gestures. Religion frequently enters these exchanges. Candidates are asked about their faith, their stance on moral issues, and even how they interpret Scripture in relation to governance. Jesus, in particular, is invoked strategically. A candidate might describe themselves as walking with Christ to reassure evangelical voters. Another might quote the Sermon on the Mount to justify welfare policies or opposition to war. For some, the appeal to Jesus is not about theology at all, but about signaling belonging to a cultural majority. In a pluralistic society, the mention of Jesus during debates functions as a shorthand for patriotism, morality, and authenticity. Yet, this invocation is often devoid of nuance. Complex theological traditions are flattened into sound bites. The radical countercultural figure of the New Testament is remade into a conservative family man, a capitalist entrepreneur, or a military defender, whatever identity resonates with the audience being courted. In the arena of debates, Jesus becomes less a religious figure than a malleable political brand. The economic dimension. Faith as industry beyond votes. The invocation of Jesus carries significant economic consequences. The intertwining of religion and commerce has given rise to what scholars call the Christian industrial complex. This industry includes publishing houses, television networks, megachurches, merchandising empires, and lobbying organizations. Politicians who prominently invoke Jesus often receive financial backing from religious corporations, while simultaneously boosting sales of books, media, and merchandise aligned with their message. televised debates amplify this cycle. A candidate's public affirmation of Christian faith may be replayed on religious TV channels, quoted in sermons, and marketed through faith-based products. Christian bookstores line their shelves with titles featuring politicians' testimonies of faith. Campaign rallies distribute branded merchandise, T-shirts, hats, and mugs that fuse religious slogans with political logos. The economic exploitation of Jesus thus extends far beyond the campaign trail. It reinforces a symbiotic relationship. Politicians gain legitimacy and funding by appealing to Jesus, while industries built around Christian identity profit from amplifying the message. The debates, broadcast to millions, are the perfect theater for this exchange. Cultural polarization and the battle for Jesus. In American debates, Jesus does not belong to a single party or ideology. Conservatives and progressives both claim his name, though they frame him differently. On the right, Jesus is depicted as a defender of traditional family values, an opponent of abortion, and a supporter of free markets. On the left, Jesus is portrayed as a champion of the poor, a critic of inequality, and an advocate for peace. This dual appropriation intensifies cultural polarization. Instead of serving as a unifying figure, Jesus becomes a weapon in partisan battles. Debates highlight this clash vividly. Candidates quote scripture to outmaneuver each other, twisting biblical passages to align with policy positions. The audience, in turn, interprets the rhetoric through their cultural lenses, reinforcing existing divisions. The tragedy is that Jesus becomes less about spiritual truth and more about political utility. His name is emptied of meaning, wielded as a tool for rhetorical victory rather than moral guidance. Case Studies 1. The Reagan Revolution. Ronald Reagan's presidency marked a turning point in the alliance between politics and evangelical Christianity. In debates, Reagan frequently referred to America as a nation under God, aligning his campaign with the growing moral majority movement. His use of religious rhetoric was both political and economic, helping mobilize millions of evangelical voters and strengthening ties with industries that marketed family values. George W. Bush and the post-9/11 era. During his debates, George W. Bush often described Jesus as his favorite philosopher. His public expressions of faith reassured evangelical voters and secured religiously motivated financial contributions. Post-9/11, this rhetoric expanded to justify military action, framing conflicts in terms of good versus evil, with implicit religious undertones. Barack Obama and inclusive Faith Obama invoked Jesus in debates to emphasize themes of hope, justice, and unity. Unlike his conservative counterparts, he framed Jesus in a more inclusive and progressive light. Yet, this too had political utility, appealing to moderates and liberals who still valued religious language. His references to Jesus also fueled book sales, media coverage, and speaking engagements in religious circles. Donald Trump and the branding of faith, though not personally devout, Trump mastered the symbolic use of Jesus in debates and rallies. Holding a Bible aloft, invoking, "In God we trust," and aligning with evangelical leaders, he transformed religious symbolism into brand identity. His appeal was less about theology than about signaling cultural dominance. Merchandise sales, caps, flags, shirts emblazoned with Christian slogans, illustrate the economic dimension of this strategy. The ethical dilemma. The exploitation of Jesus in debates raises profound ethical concerns. On one hand, politicians have the right to express their faith, and many Americans value leaders who share their religious convictions. On the other, the reduction of Jesus to a political soundbite undermines both religion and democracy. For Christians, it risks idolatry, substituting partisan agendas for genuine discipleship. For democracy, it erodes the separation of church and state, privileging one religion in a pluralistic society. It also manipulates voters, trading on sacred symbols to secure political power. Debates should be forums for rational argument and civic engagement. Yet, when saturated with religious exploitation, they become stages for emotional manipulation. overshadowing substantive policy discussion. The media's role. The media plays a crucial role in amplifying the exploitation of Jesus. Sound bites referencing faith are highlighted in headlines, replayed in video clips, and debated by commentators. Social media further accelerates the process, with quotes about Jesus going viral, inspiring memes, and fueling partisan arguments. This amplification benefits both politicians and media corporations. Politicians gain visibility and legitimacy, while media outlets attract clicks, views, and advertising revenue. In this sense, Jesus is commodified not only by campaigns, but also by the broader media ecosystem. Beyond the debates, faith as spectacle, it is important to recognize that debates are only one arena in a larger spectacle. Campaign rallies, televised advertisements, social media campaigns, and lobbying efforts all echo the same religious exploitation. The debates, however, symbolize the convergence of politics, economics, and media, making them a microcosm of the larger phenomenon. Toward a more honest politics. What would it mean to reclaim debates from religious exploitation? It would not mean silencing faith. Authentic expressions of belief can enrich political discourse, but it would require resisting the reduction of Jesus to a political mascot. Candidates would need to focus on policy grounded in ethical reasoning rather than on superficial religious signaling. Voters, too, would need to discern between genuine conviction and manipulative rhetoric. Nonpartisan forums, fact-checking, and public education could help shift the culture. Religious leaders might also play a role by challenging politicians who misuse Jesus for partisan gain. Ultimately, building a more honest politics requires respecting both democracy and faith by refusing to conflate them for economic or political expedience. Conclusion: God, in the debates, reveals the extent to which Jesus has been exploited for political and economic purposes in the United States. From Reagan to Trump, from Cold War rhetoric to modern culture wars, the figure of Jesus has been appropriated as a campaign slogan, a brand identity, and a source of profit. This exploitation undermines both religion and democracy, turning sacred faith into political theater and economic commodity. The challenge moving forward is not to exclude faith from public life, but to preserve its integrity by resisting its exploitation. Until then, debates will remain stages where God is invoked less as a source of truth and more as a means of winning votes and generating revenue.